What's up guys, Stephen Hack here. In this video, we're going to go over locomotive engineers. We're actually also going to go over subway operators and train conductors, because at least I didn't really understand the difference between these three different occupations. We're going to go into detail on the requirements for these three different ones, compare them a little bit, and then help you figure out whether one of these three different occupations are for you: subway operator, train conductor, or locomotive engineer. Okay, first let's define what a locomotive engineer is. Locomotive engineers drive trains to transport passengers or freight. They're not working on subways, they're not working on streetcars. Locomotive engineers work on heavy rail trains. And a lot of this job involves interpreting train orders, signals, monitoring gauges or meters that measure speed, doing brake examination tests, responding to emergencies, inspecting different trains to verify adequate fuel, sand, water, or other supplies, and preparing reports regarding any problems. Train conductors also work on trains, but they're not the ones driving them. Train conductors travel on both freight and passenger trains and coordinate activities of the train crew. On passenger trains, they check passenger tickets, they make announcements, but on freight trains, they oversee the secure loading and unloading of cargo. Typically, trains are moving either people or they're moving cargo. Finally, we get to subway operators. These individuals are working on trains on light rail, so they're operating subways or even streetcars. And while locomotive engineers aren't involved in collecting fares, subway and streetcar operators may actually handle the fares. Payscale actually only looked at train conductors. They didn't actually look at subway operators and locomotive engineers for their Payscale meaning survey. 39% of train conductors reported that they're extremely satisfied or fairly satisfied with their job, and 48% report that they think their work makes the world a better place. Before going into any occupation, you should really weigh the pros and cons of choosing a certain occupation. That's why we created Choose the Right Career, a 7-step program to go from 1,000 potential occupations to that one right career for you. We look at your interest, your personality, your values, how much money you want to make, where in the country you want to live, and we take all these things and help you choose the right career. Check out the link below for more details. One of the big advantages to all three of these different occupations is they all have a low barrier to entry. Every single one of them typically requires just a high school diploma or GED. For locomotive engineers, 70% have a high school diploma or GED, 23% have a high school diploma plus some kind of certificate, 7% have some college. For subway operators, 87% just have a high school diploma, 9% have a high school diploma plus some kind of certificate, and 5% have achieved some kind of college. And for train conductors, again, 86% have a high school diploma or GED, and 8% have a high school diploma plus some kind of certificate. So a huge advantage of all three of these different occupations is the barrier to entry is pretty low. You don't need a bachelor's degree, you don't need a master's degree. And as I'm going to show you later, all three of these occupations make a pretty good wage, given that they only really require a high school diploma. We can compare each of these three different occupations to other kind of similar occupations. So locomotive engineers had an average base salary of $72,940. This is before any benefits in 2021. Subway and streetcar operators $71,320. Train conductors $66,990. This is more than bus drivers, heavy and light truck drivers, ambulance drivers, and taxi drivers. And these are base salaries. This is before any overtime. And wages have been growing pretty rapidly for a couple of these different occupations. For locomotive engineers, they were earning around $61,000 in 2016. 2021, they're earning $71,410. Unfortunately, the wage growth wasn't too much in 2020, 2021, only about $750 more, or 1% raise. Subway operators saw a huge increase in wages last year. In 2016, they had an average base salary of around $62,000. By 2021, $71,520, but their wages grew by $6,000 between 2020 and 2021, meaning they got almost a 9% raise in 1 year. Unfortunately for train conductors, they've seen wages decrease since the high of 2019. 2016, the average base salary was around $56,000. By 2021, around $67,000. But the average base salary in 2021 is less than it was in 2019. So all three of these occupations, low barrier to entry, pretty high base salary. And I'm going to show you some job postings in a second. Some of these individuals are earning quite a bit of money. All you have to do is look at some of these job postings. Some of these locomotive engineers are absolutely doing really well as far as total compensation is concerned. Okay, I'm just going to use the Google search engine to look at different job postings for train conductors first. And we're going to look at jobs in the United States. And I'm just going to show you some of the job opportunities for train conductors. And again, these are the guys that are kind of walking up and down the aisle, checking tickets. And some of the pay, look at this. Major railroad freight rail employees averaged approximately $135,000 in total annual compensation. When they say total annual compensation, it includes health benefits, it includes overtime, it includes base salary. So base salary might be less than this, but still $135,000 in total compensation for something that doesn't require a degree. No degree mentioned in this job posting. Gives health insurance and it provides dental insurance. And there's quite a few job postings. I recommend using Google Jobs, and I'm going to get into this in a second. I was looking at the number of job postings on Indeed and LinkedIn, and terrible platforms for these kind of roles. I definitely recommend the Google search engine over Indeed, Glassdoor, and even LinkedIn. For locomotive engineers, yeah, degree is rarely mentioned. And what you do notice with a lot of the locomotive engineer jobs, you do notice a lot of language that indicates that a lot of these roles are part of a union. So definitely be aware of that. But as you can see, there's definitely quite a lot of different job postings for train engineers. There's different job postings. They're not necessarily called locomotive engineers. For subway operator, Subway sandwiches are showing up. That's hilarious. Subway operator and Subway sandwiches. Anyways, here's one for Detroit Zoo, a train driver for Detroit Zoo. Again, yeah, like no degree mentioned, full-time. But no mention of pay in many of these job postings. That's always really annoying. So as you can see, total compensation for all three of these different occupations is pretty high. There's not a lot of occupations out there that just require a high school diploma and pay over $70,000 a year. So all three of these occupations are kind of unique in that way. One thing to understand though about train conductors is it actually has a pretty high injury rate. Again, these are the guys that are kind of walking up and down the aisle on Amtrak trains, checking tickets, and kind of interacting with customers. According to the government, they had an injury rate of about 153 per 10,000 conductors. This is above the average occupation. So the injury rate actually is pretty high compared to other occupations. And the main cause of this is actually a high percentage of them kind of slip and fall and trip and injure themselves. So maybe it's the trains, maybe they're going from train to train and there's a slip or a fall, but happens more often than you would think. Next, we're going to get into the demand for these three different occupations. And this is one of the big cons of these three different occupations is that the demand for subway operators, the demand for train conductors, and the demand for locomotive engineers isn't that high. There's actually not that many job postings. And the reason I recommend using the Google search engine over LinkedIn, Indeed, and Glassdoor is I really didn't see too many job postings. I only really checked train conductor, and just looking for train conductor on Glassdoor, there was 115 job postings. On Indeed, 328 job postings. And this is for the entire country. And in 2021, there was about 48,000 employed train conductors. There were about 10,310 subway and streetcar operators, and there was around 39,000 locomotive engineers. So the demand for many of these occupations isn't as high as heavy truck drivers. It's not as high as light truck drivers. The workforce just is so much smaller for each of these three occupations. And usually when this happens, this usually means that you have to live in very specific places. I mean, how many American cities have streetcars? San Francisco, I think Indianapolis just put one in. So there actually more are coming out, but there's really not too much demand for streetcar and subway operators, but the jobs are out there. And if you can get one, you can make some pretty good money. But keep in mind, if you're trying to get one of these occupations, you probably have to live in some pretty specific places, especially for the subway and streetcar operators. A lot of major cities are connected to heavy rail, so just something to keep in mind. So you're interested in working on a railroad or interested in working as a streetcar driver or subway driver, let us know down in the comments below. If you're employed in one of these occupations, let us know if you actually enjoy it or not. I love hearing from people that are actually working in many of these different occupations. Get to hear some really interesting stories. But definitely let us know down in the comments below, and you'll definitely help out someone that's interested in one of these three different fields. If you enjoyed this content, there's a lot of other content on different careers and occupations throughout my channel. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.